Is 2GB.
Asbestos in mulch. I think it's fair to say we're witnessing contamination of mulch on an industrial scale. Now, the Environment Minister, Penny Sharp, has confirmed that 90% of what they think was the contaminated mulch has been followed up. And that's why we've seen 30 parks in the city of Sydney closed, 7 schools from Allambie Heights to Westmead to Mount Annan to Penrith, they're shut for investigations. St John of God Hospital at North Richmond, Woolworths in Kellyville, a park at Wiley Park, Roselle Parklands, Campbelltown Hospital, Victoria Park at Broadway, Liverpool West Public, Belmore Park, Harmony Park at Surrey Hills, a project at Nowra, train stations at Belmore, Punchbowl, Hurlston Park, Dulwich Hill, Canterbury, Campsie and Marrickville. And on top of that, the Daily Telegraph's reporting that a Sydney Olympic Park is now undergoing investigations of its mulch, and it's due to hold Taylor Swift there in only a matter of days. Imagine where are they going to put Taylor Swift? Well, none of this is ideal, but I think it's important just to remember the risk to health is extremely low. We just have to remember that. But on the flip side, you can't have a situation where schools, hospitals and children's playgrounds have got bits of cancer-causing material just sitting in garden beds waiting to be disturbed. And I think that the EPA, the Environmental Protection Authority, is getting off scot-free here because disposal of asbestos waste is governed under the Protection of Environment Operations Act 1997, and that falls under the responsibility of the New South Wales Environment Protection Authority. The EPA is responsible for the oversight, compliance of asbestos disposal, and they have very, very clearly not done their job. Now, the CEO, Tony Chappell, he's been quick to shift the blame to Green Life Resource Recovery. But has he had a good look in the mirror, Tony Chappell? Has he had a look at the mirror of his own competency and the competency of his own agency? And to see what role they have played in this massive failure of process? You cannot possibly argue that Mr. Chappell and the EPA have done a good job here, when we are seeing the mass dumping of asbestos at primary schools, parks and hospitals. Now, whether it is Green Life Resource Recovery or systemic corruption in the supply chain, as the supplier claims, well, ultimately, it is the EPA's responsibility to keep on top of this stuff. And if the EPA does not appreciate this, maybe it's time that we get some people in who will take some accountability. 131873. I've got Ray Ager on the line. He's from New South Wales Asbestos Removal, and he knows a thing or two about removing asbestos, disposing of it safely, and what actually goes on in the industry. Ray, g'day.
G'day, Chris. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. What do you make of all this?
Well, once again, it's government bureaucracy, government employees not doing their job. This isn't 10 cubic metres. This is thousands of cubic metres that have entered the public system under the EPA's watch. They collect the money, they manage the system, and they tick a few boxes and think they're doing a job.
What's your experience been with the EPA? You run an asbestos removal company. What's your experience been with the EPA? Do they come around and check this stuff?
No. As an example, we register what they call waste locate. So I register with Safe Work New South Wales. We register the job, then we register the amount of asbestos we're disposing of. We register the EPA. I've only ever been checked once. That was a young lady at Albury Tip about 2 weeks ago. They said, Mr. Ager, can I see your waste locate certificate to show that you've registered this job? And I've done a couple of thousand jobs. I've only ever been checked once.
Can you see how this has happened? How tons and tons and tons of asbestos has clearly ended up in mulch all around Sydney?
Yeah, it's quite simple. Houses are being crushed. They've been packed in the back of semi-trailers and they're delivered to the waste facility. That is the only way that it can enter the system. That's where the majority of asbestos is coming from in this state, is residential house demolition.
And what, the builders don't want to pay the freight to dispose of it appropriately and safely, is that right?
Well, the builders I work with are very serious about it. But obviously there are ones out there My question is, what's happened to all the houses and buildings around the Sydney Airport, the new Sydney Airport, which is very close to that recycling facility? Are they being crushed and then taken straight there, nice and quietly?
Do you think the EPA needs to take some responsibility of this massive failure?
I think the EPA director should be dismissed out of the public service. If it was they've tried to lay all the blame on the private companies, and someone's head's going to roll.
All right, Ray. I appreciate you giving us some insight into how all of this works, and I think it's important that the EPA does take a little bit of the heat on this, because they're just skating through like they're Bambi or something at the moment. But ultimately, they're responsible for overseeing it. You run an asbestos removal company, and you've done thousands and thousands of jobs and been checked once. Well, that says everything you need to know. Ray, I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Chris. Bye.
That's Ray Ager from New South Wales Asbestos Removal. Now, I just want to take a step back here. They're 50-cent pieces of bonded asbestos wrapped up in mulch. I spoke to people who saw it at the Rozelle Parklands and said you had to physically go looking for it to actually locate it. So how dangerous are these small pieces of asbestos to public health? Well, Associate Professor Nicole Go is a respiratory physician, and she's on the line. Nicole, g'day.
Hi, good afternoon, Chris.
So in terms of, I shouldn't say contracting, but developing mesothelioma, how much asbestos do you need to be exposed to?
There's no absolute threshold, but the relationship is really related to amounts of intensity and also duration of exposure. And it usually manifests, years later. So there's a long latency between exposure and development of disease as well. So I guess with mesothelioma, I think the exposures are quite high. And also there are other risk factors, like if you're a smoker, you would also have an increased risk of developing mesothelioma. But asbestos can relate to different numbers of diseases, not just mesothelioma. You can get lung scarring, also known as asbestosis, or you can actually get lung cancer itself, which is lung cancer in the lungs, but not in the pleura, which is what you talk about mesothelioma.
Okay, so there's no sort of threshold for how much asbestos dust you need to be exposed to, but is it the dust itself? It's not these small bits of what we know as fibro.
Well, fibro is the name that's given to the sheets that contain the asbestos. So obviously, asbestos is a natural, occurring fiber, and it's obviously used because of its strength and its insulation properties. So they have been used in cement building sheets up to the 1980s, and so the fibro is actually the name given to the sheets made with asbestos. So I live in a house that was built between, in the 1960s. So I've got asbestos in my house, but they're what we call bonded asbestos. So that generally, if they're not disturbed or damaged, you don't generally be exposed to it. So unless, if you do a lot of DIY and you do a lot of, drilling and crushing, then the asbestos are in the air and obviously inhale it. And this is why it's important to use personal protection equipment, PPE, to reduce your risk if you're indeed working, and if you're into DIY and demolition in your own homes, and you've got to be aware of the potential risk and to wear the right PPE.
And if there were small pieces of it in mulch, like we've discovered here in Sydney, the risk to health would presumably be very low.
Yeah, I would imagine. Obviously, I don't know how much, the contamination is, but, it sounds like it was contamination, from asbestos removals, as Ray outlined before, and it was obviously mixed with mulch. So I gather that, the amounts are small, and, unless you're rolling in it, day in, day out, I think the risk is, as you say, absolutely small. But it's unthinkable that they would have this issue with the mulch and there's so many areas contaminated. But as you say, the risk is probably low because it's probably low amounts of fiber and it's not really flying in the air per se.
Okay. Associate Professor, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for coming on.
Pleasure.
That's Associate Professor Nicole Go. She's a respiratory physician, also the chair of the Lung Foundation and Australia's Rare Lung Disease Committee. 131873. Do you work in the asbestos removal business? Do you know anything about it that could shed some light on this? Because I think, as Ray said, if he's done thousands and thousands of jobs over many, many years and has only been checked once by the EPA, The EPA can blame green life resource recovery all it wants, but I think there's a big mirror that needs to be set up in their office, and they need to have a good hard look at their own actions as a result of this complete and utter failure of process. 22 past 4. 26 past 4, 131873. We're giving away 2GB. Out Craig's text before about the house that was knocked over. G'day, Craig.
Hey, mate.
What happened?
No, we did a knockdown rebuild about 2 years ago of a 60s house. The back end of the house was pretty much full of asbestos and that sort of stuff, combined, bonded and, not bonded. The demo company, in their plan, said they will wrap all the asbestos up and dispose of responsibly. As I was watching the place being knocked down, mate, the whole lot just went into one bin and, basically disposed of completely with all the rest of the house. I asked the contractor, I won't name who it is, but he said, "Oh, no, we did that." I said, "Mate, no, you didn't." So, mate, the demo guys, not all of them are bad, but no, this guy, just threw all the asbestos into one bin and disposed of it wherever they do. Sorry.
All right, Craig, I appreciate that. This looks rife throughout the building and construction industry and the asbestos disposal industry. Rife. Barry's at the Central Coast. Hello, Barry.
Hi, Chris. I had a very close friend of mine die from asbestos, and I just want to make a point that affects everybody different. There's 4 of us did the apprenticeship together. I'm talking about the old days where the brake linings used to come in a roll. We used to cut it, drill it and buff it with no mask, no nothing. And only one of the 4 got the asbestosis and died from it. And I'm 80 and I'm clear from it. And back in the old days, a lot of the water, the roofs were asbestos, and you can drink it, you can eat it, but you can't breathe it.
Yeah, that would have been pretty hard for you, Barry, watching your mate pass like that.
Yes, it was.
I'm sorry to hear, Barry. I'm sorry to hear. Thank you for sharing your story. Have a good weekend. That's Barry, see? It does affect everyone differently, and, not everybody gets silicosis either from the Caesar stone bench tops and the like, but some people do, and when they do, it's absolutely dreadful. We've also heard some news that they may have found mulch with asbestos in it at Sydney Olympic Park, and there were some concerns that that might cause some issues for the Taylor Swift concert. Surely not. 320,000 fans are going to Olympic Park next weekend because Taylor Swift's in town playing her concerts, and Blink 182 is playing as well. Now, they are investigating whether any of the mulch does have asbestos in it for her 2 sold-out shows, but the Environment Minister, Penny Sharp, says pretty bluntly, this will not stop Taylor Swift performing in Sydney. Sydney Olympic Park Authority is inspecting mulch that came from the supply chain under investigation that has been used on a median strip on a divided road. Initial test has found no asbestos. A backup test is being conducted. Now, if a small 50-cent piece of asbestos stopped Taylor Swift performing at Sydney Olympic Park, that would cause more headaches than anyone could possibly imagine. So, good news from the Environment Minister, Penny Sharp. Taylor Swift, asbestos or not, will be performing next week.